So it's recording now, and you'll want him to identify himself. You know, his name, what he did, just ask him questions. Just try not to shift the tripod too much. Yes.
For our interview today, we have Julius Archibald. He served in the United States Air Force from June 23rd to June 22nd, 1955. The interview is taking place in Yoakum Hall at Plattsburgh State University on December 6, 2008, by myself, Tanifa Scipio. Our first question for you today, can you state your full name?
Julius A. Archibald, Jr.
Where were you born?
New York City.
What were your pre-war education?
Well, I was already a college graduate before I went into the military.
What was your occupation?
I was a student before going in. I was an ROTC graduate and graduated at a time when everybody in ROTC had a military obligation. And I stayed for some graduate school and then went to the military.
How did you first hear about the Air Force?
I was an undergraduate student at New York University in the ROTC program. ROTC was a required course at NYU at the time, so there was a choice between being in the Army or being in the Air Force, and by luck I ended up with the Air Force. And that was luck.
When did you enter the service?
In June 1953.
Were you enlisted?
I was an officer. Again, I was an ROTC graduate, and being an ROTC graduate, a second lieutenant's commission comes with graduation.
What was the branch of service?
United States Air Force.
Where did you receive your basic training?
I didn't. I went in as a cadet already commissioned.
Tell us about that experience and feelings.
Well, it was a time during the Korean War. The war had broken out in 1950 while I was an undergraduate student. And we were very much, of course, concerned of the success of the nation in that endeavor. And it looked like the best way to serve the country. It certainly was a more favorable way of doing it than going through the regular enlisted system.
What was your specific training?
In mathematics. I went into the Air Force as a mathematician, which was my undergraduate work, was in mathematics.
Can you tell us a little more about it?
Well, undergraduate degree from NYU, master's degree from NYU in mathematics, and then I went into the service. And I was able to use that, and in the service is when I first became involved with digital computers.
What was your unit?
I was with the Wright Air Development Center, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That was part of the Air Research and Development Command.
How did you feel about combat?
Combat was per se not an issue. I was not what we called rated, which meant I was not a pilot. At the time, I believe my eyesight would have precluded that, but I was not per se interested in flight training because I had no desire to spend time in Texas during the early 50s.
Did you receive any medals or coins?
I received one ribbon, I think it was called the National Defense Ribbon or something or other, something that everybody who served during the Korean War was entitled to.
It's why? Because everyone was entitled to it?
Yes, well that was the way it came through. It wasn't a result of any combat experience or anything else like that, but it was a way in which the nation expressed its gratitude to those of us who were in service during the Korean conflict.
Tell us about your family during that time.
Well, I was an only child. My parents were living in New York City. My father was a state senator at the time that I went in. And, my mother had been a school teacher. In fact, I think she was still teaching school at the time. And, just grew up in New York City, and that was essentially my family was in New York City.
How was New York City back in that time?
I thought it was wonderful. My mother said that it was even greater during her youth, but I thought it was a wonderful place.
Is it similar to today or no?
My impression is no. It has changed a lot, and I would have to say in the wrong direction.
How did you keep in touch with your family?
By mail. There was no email in those days. We were just getting into the computer age, so all that we had was old-fashioned snail mail. Postage stamps were 3 cents, if you can imagine that. And if I wanted to send a letter by airmail, it cost 6 cents.
How often did you write?
Very frequently.
Did you get homesick a lot?
I would have to say in the beginning, yes, but no, that wore off. I met my wife while I was there, so that did a lot to change things.
Tell us about that.
Well, she was a secretary on the base, and happened to meet her, I guess, as a result of having visited a church and meeting someone else, and it's a long story. But yes, I did meet my wife as a result of having been at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is right outside of Dayton, Ohio.
What was the food like?
Well, I was eating on my own. I was not required to eat in the mess hall or anything else like that. There were a couple of times when I pulled a 24-hour detail, and that came with food. But other than that, I ate on my own.
What about the supplies?
What kind of supplies are you talking about?
For example, personal stuff?
Again, I was on my own. You know, life as a commissioned officer is quite a bit different than life as an enlisted person.
Okay.
I was given a quarters allowance, but I was free to select where I wanted to live, and I was able to, take care of myself essentially. So I had shopping privileges at the base exchange, but I could also shop any other place I wanted to. So no problems there.
What was your most memorable experience?
Well, I think the thing that made the biggest difference in my life, other than meeting my wife, was my exposure to digital computers. That's where I became a computer scientist, or if you would today, a computational scientist. And that's what led to my faculty relationship here at Plattsburgh State. I'm a retired professor of computer science.
It's a hard subject.
No, it's not a hard subject. People try to make it a hard subject.
I took a class in
It's-
that. Oh my gosh, it's hard.
It's related to mathematics, and regretfully, Americans have a hard time with mathematics, and I think that's unfortunate. Yeah, you're giving me a kind of a funny grin.
Yeah.
You must not have had any good mathematics courses.
None at all.
Oh, you're interviewing me, so I won't ask you about your math courses. I did serve 2 years as acting chair of the math department here.
How do you feel about your military experience?
I think it was very beneficial. It's, one can always ask questions about the war and how that came out. Technically, we still don't have a peace treaty with the North Koreans. But in terms of what it did for me, I thought it was a marvelous experience, just looking back at it. It did a great deal for me. This is one of the reasons why I was in support of establishing an ROTC program here at Plattsburgh State.
Okay. So you thought it was a great experience?
It was a great experience. It was one of the best experiences of my life.
Why was it so great?
Well, I wouldn't have become involved with digital computers had I not done that. I was assigned to a unit where we were dealing with a mechanical problem, a problem concerning vibration on nose gear of aircraft, and we needed to do computer analysis of that. And that put me in line for civilian work with the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in Schenectady, where I really developed as a computational scientist. So I would say that it was a life-changing experience, not only personally in terms of my having met my wife, but also professionally in terms of what I did and what I learned and how I built upon my undergraduate work at NYU.
Is there any other memorable stories that you have?
Well, having not seen combat, I'm not sure what you would classify as being a memorable experience.
An everyday story that happened when you were enlisted.
No, I wasn't enlisted. I was a commissioned officer.
Excuse me.
No, I cannot recall that. It was a good experience. I recommend ROTC programs for undergraduate students generally. And despite the fact that, this may be a political statement, despite the fact that our present president has abused his power as commander-in-chief, I think that it's for the good of the nation that ROTC be part of what was regularly expected of students going through undergraduate programs, particularly at publicly supported institutions such as this.
A lot of students, like we have ROTC on campus,
Yes.
and a lot of students are, I would say, afraid to join it.
I fully understand that. With President Bush, who unilaterally created a war, lied the nation into a war, I could understand that they are apprehensive of that. I think that with a president who follows the intent of the Constitution, the letter and the intent of the Constitution, it is a good thing. I think that our nation depends upon that in terms of its own survival. We just cannot afford the kind of president that we recently had. Presently still have. I wouldn't want to be part of that.
So advice to them, you might say?
Well, now that the end of the Bush administration is within sight, I would say get yourself fully prepared to be able to use your education, your background and so forth, to the best advantage of defending the nation if that becomes necessary. And I think the ROTC program does that. Now, this is an Army ROTC program. Mine was Air Force, but I think the same logic prevails.
What did you do when you arrived home?
When I left the military,
Yes.
I went to work at the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory in Schenectady, where we were building power plants for the United States Navy. And my military, even though it was more civilian-like in terms of what it was, but my experience with computing was of great benefit to, I think, both myself and my employer in that study.
Do you belong to any veterans organization?
I do not belong to any veterans organizations, no.
Have you attended any reunions?
Of a military nature, no. Again, I wasn't part of a really functioning unit per se. In fact, my military experience was more like going to a job in the morning and coming home in the evening like many other professional positions.
Oh, okay. How did your experience influence your life?
Well, it got me into computer science as an aspect of mathematics, which I would have never have done otherwise. I think that if I had stayed at NYU doing graduate work on a full-time basis, I would have become involved in computing, because they did have and still do have a large computing section as part of their mathematics department. And in fact, I spent time working there for my employer using the computing facilities at NYU. They were one of the few really big UNIVAC sites back in the late 50s, I should say. This would be going back 55, 56, 57.
Well, I'd say that concludes our questions for today.
Okay,
I just want to thank you so much for being here, Mr. Archibald.
you're welcome.